Good morning, everybody. My name is Sally Allen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Livermore Lab Foundation. Welcome to the SummerSlam Special Edition. We are thrilled to be hosting today's event, where we're going to be hearing from 14 summer research students who spent some time with lab mentors and staff this summer on a number of really exciting projects. First and foremost, we wouldn't be able to do this without our great partnership with the lab, and I want to acknowledge Joanna Albala, who's with us today, who helped in so many ways over the summer with the program and helped us get set up today. And welcome to our students, many of you whom you will get to meet in the next few moments. So also with me today, I just would like to introduce a couple of folks also from the foundation. Donna Crawford is our board chair and co-founder, and we'll be hearing from her in just a few minutes. Also, Susan Houghton, a former Labbie who many of you may know, has been working with the foundation on a number of communications projects and is going to be helping us today with monitoring some questions and Q&A throughout the event. And I'd also like to welcome our special guest, Amy Aines. She's the author of Championing Science and has spent a career in understanding communications and helping people communicate more effectively, especially in the area of science. And she's very graciously helped support our students in some of their preparations for this morning's presentation. So thank you, Amy. So very briefly, I would like to just walk us through the plan for the next hour and a half. Following my introductions, I'll be handing it off to Donna for just a few minutes to give her an opportunity to welcome everyone. I know she knows many of you in today's audience, and share just a little bit about what the foundation has been up to. Then we'll get right into the student presentations, and that'll be the bulk of our time together today. And we'll close a little bit before 1 with some final comments and any questions from folks. Briefly, just a few housekeeping rules. Hopefully many of you at this point are pretty familiar with the Zoom platform, but just in case, a few reminders. All of the participants on today's webinar are going to remain muted except for our student presenters. And we've asked each student to take about 3 minutes to present their slides and their research and allow about 2 minutes for questions and answers. And so to that point, there are a couple of features in Zoom that we would like to take advantage of today. If you have a question that you would like to ask a student, please use the Q&A feature that should be along the bottom toolbar of your Zoom interface, and we will be monitoring those, and Susan especially will be helping set those up for us, and I will try to keep us on track and make sure we get your questions asked. Feel free to also use the chat function, which is also along that toolbar, if you just want to say, hey, great job, or make a general comment and don't have a question to submit. Finally, today's presentations are being recorded. We will have them up on the Foundation's YouTube channel as soon as it's available. So just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. So with that, I will hand it over to Donna Crawford. Thanks, Donna.
Yeah, thank you, Sally, and good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Donna Crawford, as Sally said, and I spent 40-year career at the Department of Energy Laboratories. The last 15 I was at Livermore Lab as the Associate Director for Computation. And before that, I was a numerical analyst, computer scientist turned manager at Sandia National Laboratories. I retired about 4 years ago now, and one of the first things I did was join the Livermore Lab Retiree Association. And we have invited our lab retirees to this event today, and I'm delighted to welcome you. I wish I could see you in person. We have these wonderful luncheons once a month with great speakers before COVID hit. And so, like many other things, we had the great idea at the foundation to offer this exciting opportunity for our retirees. So I hope you all brought your lunch with you. I can't serve you lunch virtually, but we can serve you speakers virtually. I also want to thank Julio Diaz and Jeff Garberson for promoting this idea with the Retirees Association and for their great newsletter that they're sending to everybody. So I'm a great believer in science and in the next generation of scientists. I also am a great believer in the power of science and the capabilities at the laboratories. And for that reason, when I retired, besides joining the Retiree Association, I co-founded the Livermore Lab Foundation. The idea behind the foundation is to provide opportunities for new partnerships at the laboratory to advance science and to inspire next generation scientists. And we do that by raising philanthropic funds. Note the website down at the bottom of the slide, which is showing on the screen. If you want information, because I'm not going to tell you a lot of things about the foundation this morning, I really want to get to the speakers. But if you want more information about us, please go to our website. You can either go to latest news and read about us, or you can scroll down and click on get our newsletter and receive that. So next slide, please, Sally. We have some fantastic research projects that we are sponsoring that leverage the unique capabilities of the lab's expertise and lab facilities. But what I'm showing on this slide and why I'm showing this is because this is all about the next generation students. And that is also, not only do we sponsor the research, but we try to inspire next generation students. And we do that by partnering with the laboratory and providing things that the lab cannot. We can fund scholarships, we can fund student travel, we can fund student housing, and otherwise make it a great partnership. We have 6 student programs this summer pictured on this slide, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I am only going to mention the Summer Slam program that we have. In the past, so let's see, the lab generally has 1,000 or more summer students. And those students come on site and they get to work as a scientist and with scientists. And they get to do fun things with their colleagues and take tours of the lab. And of course, that couldn't happen this year. So the lab did a great pivot. And I'll give another shout out to Joanna Albala, who's on with us today, to figure out what are we going to do. We really do want our students here. They make the summer so much more fun. They bring so many new ideas to the laboratory and to our science. So the lab figured out how to do virtual programs for about 500 students. And of those 500 students, instead of having the normal poster session at the end of the summer, the lab sponsored something called Summer Slam. Of those 500 students, about 270 actually presented all last week in their student individual directorates. And then the directorates selected these top 14 students to make this presentation today. The foundation provided a participation gift for anybody who was going to make a presentation in the SLAM. And then as a result of being selected for this opportunity, we are providing them the professional communication services of Amy Aines. So that's what we're doing with the SLAM. And with that, I want to actually turn it over to the students because that's the most important thing. But I encourage the retirees to go find out a little bit more about this foundation because it is a way to stay in touch with the laboratory too. Thank you very much. And I welcome and look forward to all of our student presentations.
Thank you so much, Donna. I appreciate it. And with that, let's get started. Our first student presenter today is David Gunderman. So David, please take it away and pull your slide up.
Okay, hi, my name is David Gunderman. I'm a 5th-year PhD student at the University of Colorado Boulder in applied math. And I'm calling in from Boulder, Colorado. So, and my mentor is Kenny Weiss. So next slide, please. Oh, could you actually make it so all the images appear? Thank you. Okay, so in 1987, a stressed out computer graphics student named Martin Newell was eating breakfast with his wife at a conference hotel. frantically searching for a model to display his new algorithms on. And thus, this object called the Utah teapot was born. The Utah teapot is a curved, trimmed NURBS, which stands for non-uniform rational B-spline, surface model of a real-life teapot. And NURBS are the industry standard way of representing geometry in computer-aided design. The Utah teapot has become such an ubiquitous test case in the computer graphics community that it is now sometimes actually jokingly referred to as the sixth Platonic solid, as can be seen here on the right. So next slide. Thanks. And then could you do the same thing here too? Thanks. So a lot has changed since 1987, and visualizing the Utah teapot is no longer the challenge it once was. But one thing that hasn't changed is that there are still PhD students frantically searching for models to use their new algorithms on. And I'm one such PhD student, and I decided the Utah teapot is still a great test case for my algorithm, which is for efficient integration over these types of regions. One way you could think of this is, instead of asking what the teapot looks like, we can ask what the volume or how much water is in it. And right now, common ways of performing integration, such as voxelization, shown on the top right there, are slow because they don't accurately represent the original teapot's geometry. And so while the teapot is interesting, the application we're really interested in is in computer-aided analysis, such as airflow over an airplane in the bottom there, where integration must be performed efficiently over these types of objects. So next slide, please. And so what our method does is it transforms integrals over onto the surfaces and then onto the trimming curves of the trim geometry, which are shown there. The Utah teapot is kind of the point cloud, the black point cloud, and if you look closely, you can see the trimming curves in various colors. And so using our new algorithm substantially reduces the amount of effort, computational effort, required to accurately integrate functions defined within objects like the Utah teapot. And so in the graph on the right, you could see that our algorithm basically performs better. It's down in the bottom left instead of the top right of that graph. So while it's interesting to find out how much water, how much tea is in the Utah teapot to demonstrate the algorithm, what we're really excited to see is how this could improve physical simulations at the lab. So thank you so much.
Super, thank you so much, David. Did we have any questions into the Q&A, Susan?
We have one question about what your next plans are. Where do you go from here, and what was your best experience at the lab this summer?
Okay, that was a couple questions, I think. But the next steps, so we'd like to apply this to some actual models. ICF, for example, inertial confinement fusion requires integrating over these types of shapes. So we'd like to apply it to some simulations that the lab is actually trying to get accurate results for. And then what was my favorite part about working for the lab? I really like my mentor, Kenny Weiss. He's super supportive and meets with me a lot, and is always willing to discuss new ideas and things like that. So I'd have to say the community or maybe the support structure of the mentors. So thanks. And I see there's another question. I will recommend this summer program to others for sure. And I have actually. In fact, there's quite a few people from my university who are now working at Lawrence Livermore. One of the other ones will actually be presenting later from CU Boulder. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you, David. I think we had a quick question in the chat, correct? From Lori Souza.
He just answered it.
Just got that one. Okay, just want to make sure.
Thanks.
Super. Thank you, David. All right, we will be moving on. That was excellent. That was within your 5 minutes, just so you know. Thank you so much for setting the bar high. Our next speaker will be Emma Drobina. Emma, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me here. I'm Emma Drobina, and I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Florida studying human-centered computing. And this past summer, I worked with Timo Bremer and Chusen Liu on NDDAV, or the In-Dimensional Data Analysis and Visualization Tool. Yeah, it's quite a mouthful. Next slide, please. So over the past several decades, there's been a massive increase in the amount of data, of scientific data that's out there to analyze. This is really great if you're a scientist, but in order to build accurate machine models to to predict complex scientific problems like simulating cell membranes or the laser interactions in NIF, you need to be able to understand that data effectively. And so even though there's a lot of model interpretations out there, for a lot of them are aimed at commercial applications where you only care about the overall error. However, for scientific computing, which is what this massive data that Lawrence Livermore and other national labs would like to use, we care about the variation of errors throughout the entire model domain, particularly for models where we're creating a physical surrogate. In these cases, even very small local fluctuations in error can obscure details that we, the scientists, really care about, but that our machine has no idea how to recognize. So some of Timo and Schusen's previous work established a method of topological analysis to help understand model behavior. Essentially, you find ways to describe the high-dimensional landscape of a function and simplify it down to 2 dimensions and present it to the user in a contour map metaphor. But given that we have this, how do we make it easily accessible to our users? Next slide. So this is where I come in. This summer, I expanded and modified the existing NDDAV tool to make it compatible with Jupyter Notebook, a common application used for data science applications. You can see a screenshot of the output NDDAV will give you in Jupyter on the slide. And you can see in the upper right-hand corner a picture of the contour map visualization you see. The peaks are illustrated in dark green with saddle points as white dots. And you can see here that this function has 2 maxima, with the one on the left having a relatively gradual slope and the one on the right being much steeper. Just like a contour map for real physical geography, as each ring of the contour radiates from the extrema or peak, the steeper the slope is, the closer the next contour line is. So that way you can visualize how the landscape of the function is acting in just 2 dimensions. Furthermore, to help the user better picture specific areas of the function, we've provided supplementary graphs in the second row, which show you the user essentially a 2D slice of the data by treating 2 features as a domain and then highlighting them based on a 3rd feature. And all of this is able to be easily integrated into existing Jupyter workflows. We have compatibility with multiple file types, NumPy compatibility, as well as pre-made notebook tutorials. So all of that is in there. Next slide. But this all leads to another question. What next? We know how to present a topological map of a function, but because we're approximating this high dimensional space, it's not typically super high dimensional. What we're working with is usually in the 10D range, but it's still much greater than what a human could visualize on their own. And in this, different methods of taking a 10D space and simplifying it down to 2 parameters or 2 dimensions can produce significantly different results. So the next phase of our research focuses on ways to automatically select the best parameters for approximation, so that if you're a novice user, you can get the most accurate topology possible for your function. And we hope to make this tool available to everyone at the lab for scientific analysis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emma. Great job on your presentation. Any questions, Susan?
We do. We have a question here. What computer do you run this application on?
I did all of my testing on a Linux machine running Ubuntu. I know that Schusen also tested on a Mac. Not sure what operating system he's using.
Okay. Next, one more question, Sally. You said that you're going to be using it for applications for the rest of the lab. What's the time frame for that possible decision?
I do not know on my own. Timo and Schusen could give you a much better estimate, since they're full-time employees who know the lab's internal procedures much better. I can tell you that the tool as it exists right now is open source and available on GitHub. So if you want to test it as it is now, you can go out and download it for yourself. It's just the NDDAV GitHub repository, NDDAV.
Super. Thank you so much, Emma. We appreciate it. Great job.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.
Yes. All right, I'm happy to welcome our next speaker, Sferdi Gaudani. She's got some previous experience with the foundation as well as a former high school internship with our summer program. So welcome, Sferdi.
Good morning, my name is Sferdi. I'm a second-year undergrad at UC Berkeley studying computer science, and I'm going to be talking to you about how I spent my summer utilizing smartphone sensors for physics education. Next slide, please. So the problem we were trying to tackle here was the lack of physics education in the US. So 2 in 5 American schools do not have adequate physics programs. A lot of this is due to slim budgets and often affects schools that are in rural areas or that serve minority students. Could you advance, please? Mm-hmm. So we thought, how can we help with this? Now that we know that there's an ongoing pandemic and a lot of schools are transferring over to having remote instruction, we need to make sure that students still have a valuable way of studying physics so that they actually retain information and go on to pursue careers in physics or science. And so we know that a lot of students have smartphones. In fact, 84% of high school students have their own smartphone. If we could utilize these smartphones in some way to support physics education, that would be great, and that would solve the problem that we're trying to look at. Next slide, please. And so the smartphones that we have actually have a lot of sensors in them, such as accelerometer, barometer, gyroscope, audioscope, magnetometer, and so much more. And these sensors can collect data that we can look at, analyze, and conduct experiments with in the classroom and at home. And so to do this, we're actually extending an app called Phyphox, which was created by the Aachen University in Germany. And we're taking feedback from students and teachers and scientists who are using this app to try to make it more classroom friendly so that students can use it to collect data on these sensors and analyze them in their experiments. If you could advance, please. Mm-hmm. So my main work this summer was learning iOS app development. Since that is pretty new to me, I've been working with mentors, watching videos about learning the Swift language so that I can modify this source code and create an app that is useful for the classroom. I've also been working in a group of interns and scientists and teachers to design and test some physics experiments that can be used in the classroom that use these smartphone sensors. So one example of those experiments is here on the right. I have a picture of some data that I collected on that magnetometer, and this data actually represents the Earth's magnetic field. So this is something very unique because in the past, I don't remember ever having done an experiment like this in a classroom, but now students have access to these kinds of experiments on their very own smartphone. If you could advance, please. So as we near the end of my internship, this application is still in progress and this project is going to be continued further. If you could advance one more time. So one important thing about our work is to share it to the public so that they know the use of these smartphone sensors. So one thing I have been contributing to is a publication on one of the applications of using smartphone sensors, and that is for heartbeat analysis. And so using the accelerometer on your phone, you can actually measure your heartbeat and get data that looks similar to that of an EKG machine that's used in medical facilities. So this is something really great that students can collect data on their heartbeat and look at it in the classroom and learn a little bit about physics and physiology. Another thing that we are doing is something called Teacher Research Academies, which is where scientists and the teachers on our team have been presenting to other teachers on how to integrate smartphone sensor curriculum into their classes. And so this fall, over 100 classes will be using our smartphone sensor curriculum that we have designed in their classes. And so we hope this leads to some happy students that have a valuable physics education. Thank you.
Super, thank you, Sferdi. We actually have a number of questions that came in as you were making your presentation. I'll ask the first one and then I'll perhaps hand it over to Susan, who's very effectively managing them all coming in. Where you mentioned in the beginning about 2 out of 5 American schools not having adequate physics curriculum and education access. Where did that data come from?
So that was an article from NPR.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Susan, I'll hand it off to you.
Yes, we have actually 3 more questions. So the first one, Lori Souza is saying to us, this is an excellent idea. What was the source of your inspiration?
So I was actually, one of my mentors, his name is David Rakestraw. And so he was actually looking at this before I even came to the lab, and how this was kind of a new thing that has been coming up in a lot of science education research and magazines. And so this was something that we wanted to start up. And so we had a team that was kind of working on the physics side of things, and then I was able to help on the more app development side of things. And so right now we're working on an iOS app, and then soon after we will be creating an Android app so that we can support a wide range of smartphone users.
And then this last question is kind of a combo. How do you record the actual heartbeat? And is there a way to calibrate the smartphone sensors?
So for now, what we're doing is we're using the Firefox app that I mentioned earlier, which is what most classrooms will be using in the fall, while the lab is still developing their app. And so on there's a feature for using the accelerometer, and that you can either use it with gravity calibrated or without gravity. And so what you can place that on your chest or different areas of your body, and then have it record your acceleration for a while. And then when you export your data to something like Microsoft Excel or Google Sheets, then you can zoom in over a small period of time and you can look at your different heartbeats.
Great. Thank you for answering all of those questions, Ferdy. We appreciate your time today. Great job.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Alec Dunton, who worked in the computing directorate. Welcome, Alec.
Oh, yeah. Hey, everyone. So yeah, I'm Alec. I'm a 4th year PhD student at CU Boulder, studying applied mathematics. And I'm going to be discussing the work I did this summer with my mentor, Ben Priest, and collaborator, Jeff Sanders. So if you could please advance to the next slide. So what I was studying this summer was developing scalable algorithms for graph clustering in a distributed computing environment. So when we say graph clustering, what we mean broadly is that we want to identify like vertices and groups of networks. And you may ask, like, why is this an important problem? Why do we care about this? Well, if you can identify clusters of individuals in social networks, so like close contacts, for example, you can use that to do contact tracing in this pandemic that we're living in. And an accepted approach in graph clustering is spectral clustering, in which we embed a large matrix associated with our graph in a low-dimensional space based on a few of its eigenvectors. And then we feed this into some clustering algorithms and then identify our communities from that. But this leads to some challenges. In a distributed computing setting, this requires a lot of communication to form these compute these eigenvectors. And in a streaming online setting, if we obtain new information about our graph, it's very costly to update our clusters and to update our embeddings. So what we've done is propose matrix sketching as an alternative to standard spectral embedding techniques. If you could please advance to the next slide. So matrix sketching is essentially taking a large matrix and embedding it in a low dimensional space, typically via the application of a random linear map. And what we really want to be doing is preserving important geometric structures in our data while reducing its dimensions significantly. And from a broad class of different approaches within the matrix sketching literature, we selected the Fast-Walsh-Hadamard transform, which is a theoretically sound but hard to implement method, at least in a distributed setting, and count sketch, which although it's less rigorous, it's much faster and very easily implemented in a distributed setting. And throughout all of our experiments, which I'll be discussing for the rest of the talk, we use stochastic block models as proxies for real world networks, where we essentially seed communities randomly and then add edges according to some probability rule that we assign to our network. So I'm going to go through the 3 panels on the top of the slide. So what we're plotting here in each panel is something we call maximum viable epsilon. All you need to know about this parameter is that when it's larger, that means that our matrix sketch is capturing less information from our original matrix. So as this epsilon parameter goes up, that means we have a lower fidelity sketch of our original data. And all of the lines, so for example, if you look at the legend in the left panel, CST90 indicates that we're using a count sketch transform, and 90 is a threshold we set for some performance metrics, in this case, precision and recall. of our clustering algorithm. So in the left panel, what we're showing is a parameter that says, as our communities become more isolated from one another, epsilon goes up. So we can get away with a lower fidelity sketch. In the center panel, as we increase the number of communities, so our network gets more complicated, what happens is epsilon goes down. So we need to make sure our sketch captures more of the information in our original matrix. And finally, as we increase the number of vertices in our network overall, so as we increase the size of our network, epsilon doesn't change too much, which indicates a level of robustness in our approach. If you could please advance to the final slide. So having studied some of the, I guess, concerns with regard to the accuracy of our method, we also looked at timing results. And we were able to show that at least using count sketch, we obtain faster embedding runtimes than the system IO itself. So we're basically getting our embeddings for free. And not to mention that count sketch is significantly faster than the Fast-Walsh-Hadamard transform and roughly as accurate in all of our experiments, which means we get a faster method that's just as accurate as a theoretically rigorous one. And on this plot, we're also displaying some results from the HPEC graph challenge, where we embed some graphs from like a standard benchmark set of data sets, and we achieve up to 90% precision and recall on graphs with up to 20,000 vertices, but then see that our method stops performing as well. And this is really because we haven't even started looking under the hood at some of the clustering methods we use after we apply our matrix sketches. And we only imagine that this is going to improve our approaches substantially. So I'd be happy to take questions. And if you'd like to learn more about our work, we have a paper up on arXiv if you'd like to check that out sometime. So thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, Alec. And really quickly, I forgot to ask students, where are you calling in from today? We're going to have folks.
Oh, should I just go first? Or?
Oh yeah, just while you're still on.
Yeah, I'm calling in from like Northern California.
Oh, you're close.
Yeah.
You're close to the foundation. Great. We had a couple of questions. Susan, should I go ahead and ask?
Sure.
Okay. The first was, thank you so much for this research, and how will this summer project help you with your work back home?
So I don't think I'm going to incorporate or at least use this project directly in my thesis. I've studied matrix sketching as a part of my thesis work in other applications up to this point. Really what this project has done is improve my computing skills significantly. So I had to learn C++ this summer finally. And I got thrown off the deep end a bit by my mentor with that one in a good way. So he did a good job giving me problems to help me develop those practical skills. So I think, yeah, if I had to pick one thing, it would really be that.
Okay, super. And then Donna wanted to know, is there a real world app that this is good for?
So I'm trying to pick a good one. In telecommunications, identifying clusters in networks is a good way to optimize their design. In biology, you can use these approaches to identify, I guess, important regions of the brain if you have an associated data from that in graph form. Is also, companies use this sort of data for advertising. So Facebook will use a social network information and identify clusters to better target people with ads. So yeah, very broad applications and graphs. Anywhere where there's a network, there's a graph and a matrix ready to be studied mathematically. So
terrific. Thank you so much, Alec.
Yeah, thanks.
For the presentation. Next, I'd like to welcome Adriana. Adriana, you are up.
Hi, so my name is Adriana Ortiz Aquino. Can everyone hear me? I can't see my video on the active speaker. Okay, I guess I'll go on. So
Adriana in the thumbnail, hopefully will give us a thumbs up.
Maybe it's just me. Anyway, sorry. So today I'll be talking about my project. So it's titled Embedding-Based Node Clustering and Temporal Interaction Networks. I am a third-year PhD student at Kansas State University, and I am calling in from Manhattan, Kansas. So next slide, please. So to start off, I'm going to talk about the data that I used for this part of my project. So it's called the Radislaw email dataset, which is, it contains around 167 nodes and 83,000 edges, where an edge represents an email exchange between two employees, and each edge has a time attribute which corresponds to the timestamp from which that email was sent. The time covered in this data set is about 9 months in 2010. And this data is also accompanied by the graph that represents the organizational hierarchy, showing who supervises who within the company. And this picture here is just showing a snapshot of the first 10 timestamps in the graph. So next slide, please. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to learn an embedding that would capture key properties from each node so that we could then find structures and patterns in the data. So the algorithm that I used for this is called Continuous Time Dynamic Network Embedding, or just CTDNE for short, which learns a time-dependent network representation for a temporal interaction network. And it does this by searching over the space of temporal random walks that obey time. So that means that in a random walk, as we take a step forward, we always need to move forward in time. We can't look at edges that happened in the past. Now, these walks are biased towards edges that appear closer in time. So that means that these walks are going to represent a possible chain of emails that happen within a week or so. And we can do this bias using this exponential function shown at the bottom of the slide. So next slide, please. Okay, so once we obtain the temporal embedding from CTDNE, we want to be able to analyze this. So one of the things I did is I clustered this data using Gaussian mixture models, which is somewhat similar to k-nearest neighbors, if you've heard of that algorithm. And so one of the results that I found is that the clustered seem to assign nodes based on structural equivalence. So that just means that the organization of the nodes is based on the hierarchical roles in the company. So the picture here on the left is the adjacency matrix of the graph shown as a heat map. So it's showing the interactions between the employees sent as those emails, and it's divided by the clusters that the Gaussian mixture model found. In this case, it found 6 clusters to be the optimal amount of clusters. Now the picture on the right is the graph of who supervises who within the company, or I should say who reports to who, sorry, within the company. So there's a directed edge from A to B if A reports to B. So just to show you one of our results, the bigger cluster, which is shown here in orange, are mostly leads in this graph. So that means that they don't have employees reporting to them, they report to someone else. And this particular cluster doesn't interact within itself, if that makes sense, as much as it does with nodes outside of the cluster. And it has an average of about 500 emails sent and received within the 9-month period. Same with the yellow cluster, yellow nodes, sorry, as if you can see it in that picture. It's a much smaller cluster, but it's characterized by not sending emails within the cluster, and it only sent about 1 or 2 emails in the whole 9-month period. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adriana. We actually had a question wondering whether you and Alec met online and shared any clustering ideas.
We did not, no. So when someone asked what he could apply his research to, I was thinking I could definitely use that for my data set to see how that would have clustered this email data. So that would have been interesting.
Great. Any other questions, Susan?
We have one more. Your PowerPoint show a 2D plot. Would it be useful to go to 3D visualization? How about adding sonification to the data?
So in this case, we are able to show the data as a 2D plot because each edge, so I'm assuming this is with respect to the first plot that's showing the actual graph, I think. So in that case, every edge has a time associated with it. So every time, so it's basically as you move forward in time, you're just adding a new edge. So it's possible to do it in 2D.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Adriana. Great job.
Thank you.
Okay, we're doing well, folks. We're right on time, right on schedule. Our next speaker is Mira Partha. Welcome, Mira. Let me get your slide up.
Hey, hi everyone. I'm Mira. I just graduated from MIT after finishing my master's, and before that my bachelor's in electrical engineering and computer science, while starting my PhD at Stanford. So I'm a Bay Area native, so I'm telecommuting just from Union City. And this summer I've been working with Tom Desautel. All right, next slide. In a pandemic, we want to be able to find a vaccine or therapeutic as soon as possible. This can mean finding an antibody that can bind to a specific pathogen. But does it antibodies is actually a really, really hard problem, which usually takes a long time. To tackle this, Livermore has been developing a novel active learning platform that combines both computational and wet lab experiments into an iterative design loop. But finding the perfect antibody requires searching through an unimaginably vast space. We have to provide good input to our computational workflow so that we can conduct our search efficiently and effectively. And we don't just care about likelihood of binding. A good vaccine candidate needs to be manufacturable, specific, and needs to react well with the human body. So in the entire space of all possible antibody sequences, good antibodies likely lie on a lower dimensional subspace. So the question I'm looking to address is, how can we constrain our search to focus on this better, more promising subspace? Next slide. Well, let's start by examining our representation. An antibody can be modeled as a sequence of amino acids, each abbreviated by a single letter. We could try random generation, but it's pretty unlikely to generate something that looks exactly like the sequence in the middle shown there. And we can't do an exhaustive search since the number of possibilities grows exponentially with length of sequence. So what can we do? Well, it turns out that this is analogous to the canonical problem of language modeling, and we can apply the same methods to our problem of sequence generation to great effect. In language modeling, we train a model on a provided corpus of text. The model learns that certain patterns of letters, like XGW, don't really occur in English, but other patterns, such as OGY following OL, do. And we can apply a model, once trained, to predict meaningful words. Similarly, we can train a model on known human antibody sequences. We do this by generating a nonlinear function, exposing it to lots of data, asking it to make predictions about the data, and then adjusting the function to correct its mistakes. In doing, the model internalizes the patterns that characterize human antibodies. So this enables it to generate more realistic sequences that retain the properties of specificity, tolerability, and so on. The simplest such model, which I've implemented first, is a kind of deep learning architecture called a recurrent neural network, or RNN, and I'm currently in the process of implementing more sophisticated language models as well. Next slide. After implementing the language models, I trained them on a large data set of observed human antibody sequences using the lab's HPC infrastructure. With the trained models, we can generate sequences that are more like viable human antibodies, and thus more likely to succeed in experiments and clinical trials. This work enhances the capability we're building here at the lab of rapid vaccine and therapeutic antibody design through active learning, so that in a pandemic such as COVID-19, we can find a countermeasure before time runs out. Thank you.
Wow, what a timely presentation and set of research that you've done this summer, Mira. Thank you. We really need this right now, as one of our attendees noted. How did you end up choosing this specific topic for your project this summer?
It's actually a funny coincidence. I chose this project before we got news of the pandemic. So I had agreed to work on this with my mentor back in early January, which I knew I was generally interested in computational biology, which is a pivot from the research I'd done previously. And I felt that working on a problem where you could tackle any sort of new disease or anything like that that comes on the scene as quickly as possible would be really cool. So there's a team at the lab that's been working on this platform for 2 to 3 years now on different diseases, so like meningitis, HPV, others. And of course, once COVID-19 became so prevalent in our minds, then of course we shifted our focus to tackling antibodies for that.
Terrific. Well, the questions are pouring in, as you can imagine. The next one was, how large was your data set and where did it come from?
So the data set is, it's the observed antibody space data set, and it's collected by a group in the UK called OPIG. It's about 1 billion sequences, and what they've done is they've collated sequences from various other published studies in all sorts of areas of biology, and then cleaned up the sequences, annotated them with positions, and then made that available for download. And I specifically looked at downloading just the ones for humans. So that consists of about 1 billion sequences.
Wow, okay. So I think that answers another question, was your method compute intensive? And did it help to use a bigger machine? It sounds like it.
Yes, absolutely. This platform, a place like Livermore with the kinds of computers we have here is the one place where you can actually do this iterative design so quickly. And so the models I'm training are quite large. They're anywhere from several 100 million to a billion parameters, and they take quite a long time to run. So it's essential to work at a place like this with the facilities we have here. Yeah.
For sure. Are you working with any drug companies as part of this?
Yes. So this project, and since its initiation, it's been a Smith line, and I'm sure we're looking to expand those partnerships as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Hopefully, Donna, we answered all of Donna's questions. She's particularly excited when we start talking about computers. So she had a couple of those questions in there. Thanks so much, Mira. Our next presentation is actually by a team of engineers that are going to be sharing with you today. We have Ryan, Katerina, and Philip. So it'll be a little bit longer than the individual presentations, but take it away. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are the TADS interns, and my name is Philip Valley. I am a rising senior at UCSD, majoring in aerospace engineering, and I am currently telecommuting from Laughlin, Nevada.
Hi everyone, my name is Katerina Pradnov, and I'm going into my second year in my master's program in mechanical engineering at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I'm telecommuting from San Luis Obispo, California.
Hi everyone, my name is Ryan Funches. I'm an incoming fourth year in mechanical engineering, also at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I'm telecommuting from Alameda, California. So we're presenting about our project, Preconceptual Redesign of Polar Diagnostic Instrument Manipulator, also known as Polar DIM, you can see on the screen in front of you. This summer, we began conceptual redesign of this large system that was originally constructed in the early 2000s. It's important to note that when we talk about conceptual redesign, we're talking about big picture establishment of new systems, as well as sizing and functional performance characterization, rather than diving into the nuts and bolts, the nitty gritty of the whole operation. So diving into our presentation on the next slide. As we all know, NIF is the largest laser in the world, with experiments ranging from inertial confinement fusion to high energy density physics, with applications from renewable energy to national security. As everyone's a science enthusiast in this call, we all know that conducting experiments is pointless without the ability to collect data, which is the job of a diagnostic instrument manipulator, also called a DIM. DIMs are able to precisely and securely locate diagnostics inside the NIF target chamber with the use of actuators at the back of the DIM, as well as in the longitudinal direction of the DIM, as you can see in the image at the bottom left. Standard diagnostics consists of three components, as shown in the image at the bottom right. We have the cart, which is the gearbox that is used to transport the diagnostic into the target chamber, the airbox, which contains vacuum-sensitive electronics for data collection, and the snout, which is the hardware that is extended for data collection. In the next slide, Philip will dictate what makes the Polar DIM that we were redesigning special.
Thank you, Ryan. So here you could see a diagram of the NIF target chamber. As you can see, most of the DIMs exist on the equator of the chamber since they occupy the floor, which is perfect for them to lie horizontally. The DIM we are focusing on is the Polar DIM, or PDIM, which is located on the North Pole port. The unique vantage point that PDIM has on experiments make it a vital part of NIF, and consequently, it is used on almost every shot. There are many other diagnostics that utilize this top-down view, such as PDIXI, an X-ray imager, which is just to the left of PDIM. This introduces constraints that need to be considered when working with PDIM. When PDIM was first designed, the procedure involved simply turning a horizontal DIM on its head and placing it on top. There was little design consideration for the vertical orientation, and thus improvements can be made. Next slide, please. So for our preconceptual redesign, there are many different areas of improvement that we're going to look at. The first issue that we targeted was loading of the airbox, which is part of the diagnostic. As you now know, diagnostics are placed into PDIM so that it can be extended into the target chamber to collect data. To set the scene, PDIM occupies 3 floors within the NIF facility. So the diagnostic is brought into level 5, then a crane above lifts the payload past level 6, and it's inserted into the back of PDIM. Ergonomically, this is not optimal for the worker. The operation also requires significant time and manpower, requiring a total of 4 people to be present and 6 hours total to install it. Another area of improvement is the cable track. And this allows the organized bundle of utility cables feeding the diagnostic to smoothly follow along as it is extended and retracted into the target chamber. The current design, as you can see, is balanced, which can lead to bowing at the top loop. Another main issue that we targeted was the structural safety of PDIM. As Ryan mentioned, the cart that carries a diagnostic travels on a rack and pinion via a gearbox. This means that roughly 700 pounds is supported by a single gearbox, which acts as a single point of failure. This means that if it were to fail, the entire diagnostic would come crashing down into the target chamber, causing significant damage to itself and other surrounding hardware. Improvements to these areas have the potential to significantly improve the operational capabilities of PDIM. Next, Katarina will demonstrate how we approach these improvement points. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Philip. So as Ryan and Philip mentioned, PDIM is a large system made up of many subsystems and components. And on top of that, it interacts with the NIF facilities and personnel in many ways. So in order to properly redesign a new PDIM, we needed to employ systems thinking. And the way we did that was first by creating the functional diagram, which you can see on the slide here. And this diagram helped us identify 6 main interfaces for the PDIM, which are highlighted in the colorful boxes shown. And I'd like to draw your attention to 3 really important ones for us. First is the purple box, which is the vacuum interface. This lets us know that PDIM will interact in a vacuum environment in the target chamber and at atmosphere outside. So we need to pick materials that are vacuum compatible. Second is the orange box. This lets us know that in the target chamber, when a shot goes off, PDIM will interact with a radioactive environment. So we need to pick components which are rad hard, meaning that they won't be greatly affected by the radiation. Third, and most important for us, is the operator interface, shown in the yellow box right at the center of the diagram. This is where operators load airboxes into PDIM so that it can be taken out into the target chamber. And this is where we identified that we can make the most improvements in efficiency and ergonomics. So this is the first subsystem that we decided to tackle. And on the next slide, I'm going to go into how we did that. So in order to generate creative ideas, we had to work collaboratively and with many modes of ideation. So after many rounds and discussions with our mentors, we came up with a lot of ideas, but finally pared it down to 4 main designs. And what was great about all these designs is that they're custom to the unique constraints surrounding PDIM, namely the vertical orientation of PDIM. So they all load the airbox in on level 5, completely eliminating the issue that Philip described, where now we have to hoist PDIM, the airbox, and load it into PDIM. So with these 4 designs being as great as they are, we have to narrow them down to 1. And on the next slide, we're going to go through how we did that. So the first thing we had to do was verify that our designs are actually better than the current method. And we did that by using the datum-based decision matrix shown at the top of the slide. In this matrix, we set the current loading method as the datum and compared our 4 designs to that. And at the end of the analysis, if our designs end up with a positive score, that means that they are better than the current method. As you can see, all 4 of our designs did end up with a positive score, so they are all an improvement to the current method, so we can go ahead and choose one. And we chose one by creating the weighted decision matrix, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. Here, for a set of criteria, we compared the 4 designs against each other, and the ones with the highest scores are considered the best, and they're highlighted in yellow at the bottom. Because these scores were so close, we had to have some more discussion, but finally we settled on a design which featured a linear stage, which is highlighted in the green box shown. On the next slide, Ryan will tell us how using the linear stage design will help us overall.
The new loading design is projected to improve the PDIM in a few different ways. First and foremost, efficiency. The new loading design is estimated to match the required manpower of other modern positioners, decreasing the current install person power of the airbox from 4 people taking 6 hours to 3 people taking 2 hours. This yields a 75% reduction in required person hours, as well as a $416,000 yearly savings when wages are considered. Additionally, this increased efficiency cuts the loading time by 66%, opening up the opportunity for more NIF shots every year. Ergonomically, this install system is safer for workers with less handoffs, high load machinery to move heavy hardware, and the ability to install the Airbox on a single floor. Additionally, the loading system is critical for development of other subsystems inside the DIM. The use of a hanging cable track and a redesigned Airbox adapter with increased redundancies in the design will help to mitigate some of the problems that Philip mentioned earlier in the presentation. While this subsystem ideation shows promise, there's much other vessel redesign to be done, which can be seen on the next slide. Coming out of ideation, we've moved into the design phase, and we're including a more detailed fleshing out of component specifics and how constituent subsystems will interact with each other inside of the DIM. From there, we'll move into analysis, or finite element analysis can be used to size components and design for both strength and stiffness. Finally, we will concern ourselves with the operations, which will include the transport and handling of both the Airbox and the vessel itself, as well as the concept of operations that will have to be followed by everyday workers inside of NIF. We are doing our best to put a footprint into each step of this design process before we overturn this project to a more permanent group of engineers at the end of the summer. Thanks for listening. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much. Great job, all three of you. We had a couple of questions come in while you were speaking. One had to do with NIF being such a fundamental resource at the lab. Were any of you able to actually have a tour of NIF this summer, or was it all virtual?
We were fortunate enough to have a virtual tour of NIF a couple of times, actually. Our team, as well as other lab employees, were able to take us through with like slideshows and stuff, but unfortunately we were not able to go in person.
Okay, thanks. I think a couple people wanted to know, how did you, the three of you, sort of come together? Did Ryan and Katerina, did you know each other at Cal Poly? How did this work sort of in this strange virtual remote situation we had this summer?
Yeah, I'll definitely say, so Katerina and I did not know each other at Cal Poly. All three of us came in, you know, it was kind of weird just looking at a blank face on a screen and just, you know, not anyone had their cameras on to start with, but as the summer went on, we were able to meet more and more on WebEx in our own room, grow comfortable with each other, have a better flow of ideas between us. We were able to use Microsoft Teams in order to use project management software and better organize the timeline of the project. But to me, the biggest thing that made a difference was just getting to know the team. You know, being able to say ideas that wouldn't be judged, throw out things that might seem crazy to some, but you know, sometimes those are the best ones.
Great, thank you. A couple more. I know we need to move on, but just to make sure we get all the questions. Were there any constraints or advantages by the various NIF diagnostics and their electronics in your work?
I'll definitely say that the biggest constraint it put on us, in terms of all the Airboxes contain vacuum sensitive electronics, and the Airbox tends to, it's well designed such that we want to keep the radiation out. We want to keep atmospheric pressure inside of there. The biggest constraint for us is just in terms of size. Our biggest constraint was we wanted to move forward with a better loading design. And due to the length of some of these Airboxes, lengths of some of these snouts, we had to sort of think about how we were going to redesign PDIM such that we'd be able to load this very long object into somewhere that hasn't been loaded before, which was a new experience for us.
Right, okay. Two more quick questions. How would you test the new design? And would it require using NIF time, or can it be done offline?
So in our case, because this project is so big, we are in the very early stages. That is where like the pre-conceptual design kind of comes in, where we're thinking more about how we're redesigning it and like what new subsystems we want. And we're not quite at the testing stage. So that would be something that a full-time team of engineers would be taking care of. So we can't really speak to that, but it would definitely, from our understanding, include some testing outside of the NIF facility in clean labs to ensure that things are working properly.
Great, thank you. And last question. Do efficiencies in loading take into account the everyday workload caused by other subsystems?
So if I'm understanding correctly, your question relates to kind of whether our loading impacts any other diagnostics and systems, like Philip mentioned PDIM, which is right near there. So in our design, we made a really big effort not to interfere with other diagnostics. Our focus has been on PDIM, so we haven't made any improvements to other diagnostics, and at the same time, we have tried not to interfere with them. So there shouldn't be any impact to other surrounding hardware like PDIXI.
Okay, thank you so much, all of you. We really appreciate it. Great job. Sarah, thanks for your patience, and we're going to hand it off to you next. Welcome, Sarah. Put your slide up.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Azar. I'm a fourth-year undergraduate at Georgia Tech. I'm studying mechanical engineering with a concentration in nuclear energy. This is my first summer at the lab, and I worked on Monte Carlo studies of bremstalling emissions for NIF. Next, please. So in this age of...
Oops, sorry.
In this age of social media, everything is about taking pictures. We want to be able to take the best types of pictures that we can. So there's 3 things that go into taking a good normal photo. So there's the high resolution, next, good lighting, next, and correct shutter speed. So all of those make a high quality photo. But my research wasn't just taking any average photo. We're trying to take photos of implosions of fuel at NIF. So in order to take these pictures, we have to kind of adjust the parameters we're working with. Next. So while we do want the high resolution, we don't just want good lighting, we want high energy photons. And these high energy photons are going to be X-rays. We also want a short pulse of what we're taking the picture with because these implosions happen really fast. So the solution to this is to use a short pulse high intensity laser to take photos using X-ray photons. Next. So here's just some photos taken with X-rays over time. The one on the left is the first photo ever taken with an X-ray versus the ones on the right are new photos taken with X-rays generated by lasers, and they're much higher quality. Next. So how exactly do you take photos with X-rays and how do you make X-rays out of lasers? So you start with a laser beam that hits a target made of a high Z material. This creates a plasma. This plasma has free-floating electrons that are really hot and moving at relativistic speeds. These hot electrons moving near high Z nuclei can create what's called bremsstrahlung radiation, which creates X-ray photons. Bremsstrahlung is German for braking radiation, and it means like stopping. So when a fast electron comes near a high Z atomic nuclei, it slows down, and this slowing down needs to be compensated by the conservation of energy. So this energy is released as an X-ray photon, which we can use for our photo taking. So if you can just press next like 8 times, it'll show you a little animation of simulations that I was running on a GANT4, a Monte Carlo simulation. So essentially I input energies of monoenergetic electrons and a thickness of a target, which is the red bar you see, and a detector sphere can measure parameters of the output X-rays created with bremsstrahlung. So here on the right, you can see some of the data that I was able to obtain from these X-rays. At the top, I have the angular distribution of an X-ray created by a certain energy input. Next, I have an energy spectrum of different X-rays created by monoenergetic electron inputs. And finally, you can see I did some efficiency calculations and manipulated the data to see which energies of electrons create the highest energies of X-rays. So essentially what we're trying to do is take these parameters and optimize the way we create the X-rays to take the best photos possible. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. That's a fascinating subject. How did you choose this research project this summer?
So I wanted to work at NIF for sure because I was really interested in ICF, and my mentor was specifically working on the radiography capabilities of NIF ARC, the smaller laser at NIF. So I kind of just hopped on to what him and his partner were doing. Found it really interesting.
Super. Any other questions? Oh, I had one more come in. Are you going back to Georgia Tech?
So I'm doing a different internship in Atlanta this fall, but I'll be going back in the spring.
Okay, super. Thanks so much, Sarah. That was great.
Thanks.
All right, our next speaker is Andrew Maris. Andrew, take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Maris, a first-year nuclear science and engineering PhD student at MIT. I'm coming to you today from the Space Coast in Central Florida. And my mentor for the project was Livermore staff scientist Shahab Khan. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Many of the greatest changes to human civilization were caused by the discovery of new forms of energy creation. As the world shifted from burning wood to coal to oil, each era looked vastly different from the last. We at the National Ignition Facility are trying to make inertial confinement fusion, known as ICF, the next giant leap in energy production. If we can consistently create a miniature sun using ICF, it will bring about a safer, cleaner, and more prosperous world. Next slide. What stands in our way can be thought of as the most challenging game of whack-a-mole in the world. Over the past decade, we've chased down defects in ICF implosions one by one. And on the left is a model of an imploded fuel capsule with a few types of potential defects pointed out on the side. Let's focus on just one of the defects, the protrusion coming out horizontally from the right side of the implosion. This is caused by the fill tube, a necessary part of target construction that feeds the fusion fuel into the capsule. Researchers have made significant strides in limiting the impact of the fill tube by shrinking the size of the tube. But we continue to find other defects that hold back further progress. The challenge of being an ICF researcher is optimizing the countless experimental parameters to avoid the many known defects. This is challenging because our monkey brains weren't designed to solve high-dimensional problems like this. Even Spock was limited to 3D chess. But here's the key to my research. An AI algorithm can handle as many variables as you can throw at it, allowing it to potentially deal with all the whack-a-mole holes at once. Next slide. My project is the first research effort to train AI to predict fusion performance using only experimental data. The AI processes the causes of the instabilities, target defects, implosion roundness, and other effects, and estimates their impact on fusion performance. We refine the model by studying how the predictions of the AI compare to the actual performance, as shown on the right. The closer the dots are to the dashed line in the center of the plot, the better the prediction is. We already have good agreement, and we expect to make further progress. We can also investigate the structure of the AI architecture to understand the significance of the experimental parameters and how they interact with one another. By interrogating the model, we can identify the causes of high-performance experiments and gain insights into ICF physics. Fusion is hard, but AI can help. If we deploy computers to learn the relationships from the experimental data, in other words, ask computers to work smarter and not harder, we might be able to create practical fusion energy. Now, there's a joke among scientists that fusion is always 20 years away. If you ask my friends, they'll tell you I ruin jokes all the time. And I hope I can ruin this joke too. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. The audience was very impressed. How does this work relate to your graduate studies?
So I am starting in the fall, so I'm still sort of like picking out advisors. I will likely be doing something that involves looking at how we can use machine learning to learn from experimental data. It's a really up and coming part of scientific inquiry nowadays, using AI to act as a sort of like robotic robotic lab assistant. So hopefully by the time I finish my PhD, I won't be giving, I won't be eliminating my own job. But yeah, it's a really exciting idea to use AI to try to learn something more from the data.
Great. A related question came in. What AI learning platform are you using?
So I'm using two. One is called gradient boosted decision trees. The other is a neural network type model called GIN that was developed at Livermore, in fact. So I'm using both these two different types of architectures, which can tell us different things and have different efficacies. So I'm looking at both of them and comparing their performance.
Okay, great. We had one last question come in. Some of the data showed a lot of scatter. How does this affect the use of the data as a training set? And does it mean something might be missing from our understanding?
Yeah, well, an interesting thing about ICF experiments in general is that it's already very difficult to repeat experiments. So I think right now, you expect something between 10 to 40% difference in performance if you keep repeating the same shot over and over again. So it's actually quite high variability on shots. So there is some scatter on the plot, that is true, but part of that is just because the noisy nature of the data. We would expect there to be some significant amount of scatter anyway. But so far it's pretty good agreement, and we expect to improve the agreement as well going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Andrew. Great job.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Enzi. Welcome, Enzi.
Cool. Thank you, Sally. And so hello, everyone. My name is Enzi, and I am a second-year PhD student in material science at UC Berkeley. I'm calling in from Berkeley, California today, and this summer I worked with Tim Frolov to investigate how chemical diversity can increase the mechanical strength of superalloys. Next slide, please. So first, what is a superalloy? Well, imagine you have a chunk of your favorite material and you heat it up. Does it get stronger or weaker? From experience, you would probably say the latter, but that's no fun. Just as we can brave the heat of this Livermore summer, we expect our materials to behave likewise. Superalloys are a class of structural materials, typically nickel-based, that get stronger as you increase the temperature, and they can retain this strength even at very high temperatures. They are critical to the integrity and performance of airplane engines, power turbines, and nuclear power plants. Next slide, please. To better understand this unique material's property, naturally, we look at the structure. Nickel-based superalloys are strengthened by the presence of nickel-3 aluminum precipitates, which have the ordered structure shown here. In the cubic unit cell, we have two distinct sites. The aluminum atoms sit on the corners, and the nickel atoms sit on the face centers. Now, when we add in a third alloying element like titanium, the titanium atoms can go to just the aluminum sites, just the nickel sites, or a mix of the two. And it turns out that this site preference actually affects the strength of the alloy. Now, site preference and its associated measurements are slow and challenging to perform experimentally, so we turn to computational methods to investigate this behavior. So using density functional theory calculations, we can get the data shown in the plot on the right, where we've plotted a property that's directly related to alloy strength versus the site distribution. Here we've kept the concentration of titanium fixed at 6%, but vary its distribution between all aluminum sites on the left and to all nickel sites on the right. Our studies showed that titanium not only prefers to be on the aluminum site, but it also increases the strength of the alloy more relative to being on the nickel sites. Next slide, please. So after seeing this, we drill deeper into the question of site preference. By combining more density functional theory calculations with a thermodynamic model, we can quickly calculate the site preference of more alloying elements. The plot on the left shows a subset of those elements, revealing that site preference differs based on the solute species and can even change, as iron does, depending on the concentration. So this automated computational approach that I showed here is orders of magnitude faster than what's feasible with physical experiments. And so it allows us to rapidly screen for elements and analyze their ordering behavior. Ultimately, our goal is to use this knowledge to build machine learning descriptors to correlate ordering features with high strength, enabling an intelligent search for promising superalloy chemistries across the entire periodic table. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thank you, Enzi. One question that came in during your talk was, are there any advantages of multi-layer structures, including superalloys?
Multi-layer structures. I guess I'm not quite sure by that question. Typically, these superalloys are precipitate strengthened. So you have, as I showed in that picture, these like chunks of precipitates embedded in this larger, inside this larger matrix. If you had multi-layer structures, I guess I'm not sure. That would be something to investigate. It would be interesting because I guess it's strengthened by these interfaces. So these barriers where different materials meet. So that could have some interesting effects at play.
Okay, thanks so much. Another question, how do you validate your model and assess the uncertainties in it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned experiments are hard to perform and the literature is completely divided. It's kind of all over the board, even for the simplest materials. So we're just trying to scan the literature, compare it with some known materials, such as intrinsic nickel-3 aluminum or nickel-3 aluminum with titanium. That's like a common alloy that's tested. So, and just trying to do our best. The data is quite variable and noisy, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you so much, Enzi. I'm going to move us on. I'm aware of our time too. Thanks so much. Our next speaker is Austin Mullen. Austin.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Austin Mullen, and I am a third-year PhD student at UC Berkeley in nuclear engineering. And today I am calling in from beautiful Fremont, California. So today I'll be talking to you about increasing the light collection in the Watchman detector using wavelength shifting plates. Next slide, please. So first off, what is the Watchman detector? The Watchman detector is a 1 kiloton fiducial gadiated water detector to be deployed in the Bowlby Underground Research Laboratory in England, conveniently located 25 kilometers from the Hartlepool nuclear power plant. Its goal is to monitor the nuclear plant using antineutrinos emitted from the reactor cores. This allows it to support the global nonproliferation mission by ensuring that fissile material is not diverted from the reactor for use in nuclear weapons programs. The issue, however, is that the antineutrino interactions within the detector do not produce much light. Further, the light that is produced has a good chance of not hitting a photodetector, or PMT, as seen in this figure. One could increase the number of PMTs in the detector to increase this light collection, but this quickly becomes prohibitively expensive, as PMTs are one of the largest detector costs. And next slide, please. Jump back one there. One more slide, please. There we are. So how can wavelength shifting plates help with this issue? First, it's important to address what wavelength shifting plates are. These plates will absorb light and re-emit it isotropically at a wavelength more suitable for detection by the PMT. This re-emitted light can then be guided by total internal reflection towards the detector, where it is seen and recorded. Simply, these plates act to increase the effective collection area for photons to be captured, as seen in the figure. Light that would normally miss the PMT and thus miss detection instead intersects with the wavelength shifting plate and is absorbed and redirected. These plates then raise an interesting question. PMTs, as I said, are one of the largest detector costs. Could we reduce the number of PMTs needed in the detector and compensate for them with the wavelength shifting plates without sacrificing detector performance? Preliminary results indicate yes. The graph shows the total light collected by the detector, represented by the number of PMTs that we see, or that see a photon in an event. The baseline Watchman detector with 20% photo coverage is in black. If I remove 20% of the PMTs, bringing the coverage down to 15%, we arrive at the curve in red. Clearly, detector performance is impacted, as fewer PMTs mean less light is seen from events. If I surround the PMTs with the wavelength shifting plates, however, we arrive at the curve in green. The loss of light from the reduction in photo coverage is more than compensated for by the plates. This is an exciting result, as a reduction of 20% of the PMTs corresponds with a cost savings of multi-million dollars. This could allow water Cherenkov detectors for nonproliferation purposes to be deployed much more cheaply and more readily in the future. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Austin. I apologize for the slide moving around. That's on my technical end. How did you get interested in this topic? And do you think you want to stay in the field of non-proliferation?
So I've always been interested in non-proliferation since I started nuclear engineering back in undergrad. I always wanted to steer towards a kind of mixed technical and policy bent. And so combining my interest and knowledge with nuclear physics with my interest and knowledge in non-proliferation and nuclear weapons more generally kind of leads me right into this project, which is a perfect combination of the fundamental nuclear physics of anti-neutrino detection with the non-proliferation applications.
Great. Thank you, Austin. I'm going to have to move us on, but we appreciate it
Thank you
so much. And our last speaker of the day, very patient, Adam Oler. Adam, welcome.
Hey, how are you doing? My name's Adam Oler. I've recently, as of this weekend, just completed my PhD in nuclear engineering at Texas A&M University. I'm working in the weapons and complex integration under mentor Arturo Vargas. And what we did this summer was implement a package called AMGX from NVIDIA, which is an algebraic multi-grid package where we're doing the solves of the matrices on GPUs, and we implemented it into a package called MFEM, which is used across a lot of laboratory softwares for higher order finite elements, and it's an open source package that's available online. Next slide. And so to go into a little bit of the detail of how this is actually working, we have the host, which would be kind of how you normally think of a computer running, where we have different cores of different processors. And when we say we're solving linear systems, we've taken these complex equations and broke them down into basically a matrix solution, AX equals B. And we can distribute that matrix system across multiple MPI processes. And what we've done is, initially this was kind of a scattered mess of arrows pointing everywhere. And the bulk of my work this summer was making it into this nice diagram where I'm actually telling the MPI processes how to communicate with each other, how to communicate with the GPUs. And basically what we're trying to take advantage of is the GPUs are really capable of solving a lot of complex linear systems very quickly due to the way that their memory is organized. And when we get to looking at high order or higher scale computers, as we get to a push towards exascale computers, more efficient ways to solve these systems become more prevalent and more reasonable. Some of these exascale computers are running on 3 megawatts, which is, it would take a small nuclear reactor to run these things. And so if we can get to simulate or solution time faster, then we can move quicker with these simulations and run more simulations and solve different problems. And so what we've done is we've kind of organized this to work more efficiently. Next slide. And so taking a look at how this kind of works in practice, I took a simple equation, the Laplace problem, and we looked at solving it with 40 CPUs and 4 GPUs for the AMGX version. So we're looking at Hyper from MFEM, which is a parallel distributed matrix program that we use. And then in comparison, we compared it to AMGX from NVIDIA with the 4 devices. And so basically, the 40 MPI processes are assembling that linear system and then passing that information onto the GPUs. And what we can see is we look at a kind of a scaling study when we have a small amount of elements, the GPU actually takes more time than the CPU solve. But as we start to increase towards about 17 million elements, and actually when we get past about 500,000 elements, solving this equation about 100 times sequentially, we start to see speed up. So basically we're throwing more resources at the problem and we're getting a better speed up. And eventually we get to a point where the GPU is really utilizing its distributed memory, or it's utilizing its memory, and it's able to accurately solve these problems in a much higher speed up. Next slide, please. And so taking a look at this in a more realistic problem, we turn towards looking at time-dependent heat conduction, where we have a more realistic problem where we're looking at basically any kind of object. In this case, I chose a square tube where we're heating it up at a certain point and the heat is being conducted through the device. And so what we have is the same setup where I'm using 40 MPI processes for just the CPU solves. And then additionally, I'm using 40 MPI processes for the GPUs. And instead of staying at 4 devices, I actually separated into 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can look up whether or not we're going to get some additional performance boost by adding in more GPUs or not. And looking at this, since it's a time-dependent problem, we set it at just a general cap of 30,000 iterations. Same setup where we did 825 to 17 million elements. And in this problem, since there's a lot more going on outside of just the solve that we were doing, we're not going to see quite the speed up that we got when we get to the high range, which was at 11.5, and we're reduced now to about 3.2 times the speed up. But as we can see in comparison, even using just one GPU device in comparison to the CPU gives us a speed up all the way down to the 3.2 speed up where we get up to with 4 devices. And so this is interesting to see that just with this minor implementation of just a single algorithm to do a matrix solve, that we're getting a lot faster speed up, which we want to be able to take advantage of using these high powerful systems like Sierra, Lassen, and then in the future, I guess El Capitan's coming down the line at Livermore, which is predicted to be exascale. So the faster we can get solutions for these problems, the more money we can save and the more problems that we can solve. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thanks so much, Adam. Fantastic. We had a question come in wondering about your future plans with your PhD in hand. Might you be coming to the lab, or what?
I've talked about it, but I ended up accepting a job at X Energy in Maryland. It's a reactor company for next-gen VHTR reactors. A lot of their work is pebble bed reactors. The one that I'm going to be working on is a small modular reactor that's going to be designed and built within the next 4 years and deployable through the Department of Defense. And so I do have plans on continuing research like this. I've talked to mentors. I want to keep working on research and maybe eventually come back to the lab system. But right now I'm going to go design some reactors.
Sounds good. Well, congratulations and
thank you very much.
Thank you so much to all of our presenters today. I know we're almost at time, but I want to just thank you all so much. It was really incredible to hear about the research you've done this summer, and appreciated the opportunity to hear it directly from you. I'll turn it back to Donna for just 2 minutes while we close out.
Well, thank you. That was fantastic. I want to go back to the lab. I want to spend more time with each of the students. I should actually ask Amy, our professional communications person, what she thought, how things went today.
Well, this was just so impressive at so many levels. I am delighted to see that you are all already really strong communicators. I'd love to help you polish a bit, but that's all you need, because you are good at this already. You are clear, you are great at orienting to complex visuals. There were so many things I learned today because you were able to tell your stories well. So bravo to everybody. Nice work.
Yay.
Congratulations to all the students, and thank you for going the extra mile and participating with us today. I hope our retirees have, I'm seeing lots of things slide by on the chat. I hope our retirees have enjoyed their time today. I look forward to the time when we can all get together in person. And you know, you can always send me email if you have additional questions for any of the participants. So to any of the attendees, keep the conversation going. And thank you all so much. With that, we'll wrap up exactly on time.
And for our screenshot, can everyone just wave really quickly and we'll get a good picture of you. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Best wishes to all of you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. And we hope to, as Donna said, see you before too long. Take care.